wanted to just introduce quickly Matt Pines, because we've been, or Matthew, sorry, I don't know if you use if you use Matt.
Matt's fine.
Okay. So Matt and I have been talking, and Matt works with the Summer Camps Association. And so we've had a few phone conversations and kind of worked together on this agenda. So Matt, do you want to introduce yourself? And then I'll kind of talk about some of the other folks who will be speaking this morning.
Yeah, very quickly. I'm the current board vice president of Maine Summer Camps, and Ron Hall is the executive director, Maine Summer Camps here. And yeah, we started having this conversation with Olivia and MEEA, and it's just sort of snowballed very quickly, which I think from a summer camps perspective, we're coming at this from, you know, we have potentially resources that might be able to help schools in getting kids back into in-person learning in the fall. And so that's where we're coming at this from. And then sort of meeting Olivia through this process, finding out that the conversation is happening in a lot of tangentially related areas, which I think is super exciting. So I might talk a little bit about it more later, but I'll throw it back to Olivia to kick us off.
Cool, thanks, Matt. So just a little contextual framework. Sorry, my hair is being crazy this morning. I've been having some conversations at the national level regarding different ways that environmental education could support schools, including helping schools think about their on-site property in creative ways. Obviously, this has been a national conversation. So in like warmer climates, there's been a little bit more excitement around like how we could literally have kids outside all day on school property and doing outdoor classrooms and like, you know, doing social distancing using that. Although in Maine, there has been a lot of models of schools doing things like Forest Fridays, and there's, you know, gardens and learning outdoor classroom spaces, but I don't know, we just have we have more hurdles because of our climate. As well as there's been some conversation regarding, you know, could environmental education professionals who are, you know, unemployed because they're not able to go into schools to do field trips in the fall, is it possible that they could come onto site and do some small group like team building, you know, teaching, just spreading kids out into smaller spaces. So there's been a lot of brainstorming around on-site potential. Could we also help teachers understand how to build the skills to actually teach outside themselves in a more comfortable way? So maybe there's some professional development components. And then there's some thinking around offsite, like community, working with offsite spaces that are available in the community. And so there's a lot of different like places this conversation can go. So I put in a document in the bottom of the, you know, where we started to frame out some of these potentials, and it's just super drafty. But that's been kind of like trying to coalesce the conversations at the national level, the options that have been coming up, and like just get it into paper form. But it's, you know, that's just like open. We could add more ideas, we can add to it. It's just like a beginning point. And it's at the bottom of your agenda. I think it's called the Maine Draft EE Outdoor Learning Guidance Doc. It sounds more formal than it is. It's still like super drafty. So I also wanted to invite Erica Beck-Spencer, who works for the Lawrence Hall of Science. The Lawrence Hall of Science has been one of the leading thought leaders in this conversation at the national level. And we're lucky enough to have Erica, who, it's out of Berkeley, California, but Erica actually lives and works in Maine and has been really involved in the environmental education community for many years. And she said that she would be willing to do a brief update on that kind of national conversation.
All right, well, thank you, Olivia. And I've met many of you, but some of you are new to me. I'm also, just a former MEEA board member, as well as a current Maine Math and Science Alliance board member. So my paycheck comes from California, but my heart is in the state of Maine. And when these conversations started happening, I don't know what month, March, I think, you know, I instantly started thinking about all the environmental educators in Maine who are probably losing jobs. And the thing that got me most excited, and in the agenda under my under number 3, I put a link that I just got this morning, and Alex could put it in the chat perhaps. But this is a list of resources that Green Schoolyards America is creating, and it's amazing. And there's one article in it about how Chicago, if you're opening it as we speak, you scroll down, what's it called? Flashback in the fight against tuberculosis, open air schools in Chicago took an unorthodox approach to keep kids outside even in the winter. So 100 years ago, Chicago had kids learning outside, and they literally moved desks outside. So when I read that, I just got really excited thinking about the possibility. So I will say this is a national movement, and I'm guessing you all know that shifting in funding for environmental educators is, shifting towards COVID relief. So I think we have a great opportunity to take the expertise from the informal educators, the environmental educators, the outdoor educators, and using that network to support public schools and reducing class size and getting kids outside. I think it was a week or two ago that Green Schoolyards America and the Lawrence Hall of Science teamed up, and they did I forget how long it was, maybe an hour and a half webinar. And they actually maxed out at 300, and then they had an overflow of close to 1,000 people. Was anybody on that call? But it was amazing and very inspiring. And Sharon Danks presented they're thinking about different schools, like what would a schoolyard look like in LA versus a more northern climate. And they actually took a screenshot of the schoolyard and started thinking about where multiple classrooms could be outside at the same time. So I don't have much to share, except I will keep adding resources I'm hearing at the national level from Beatles, which is part of the Lawrence Hall of Science. We can keep adding these resources. I have done a tremendous amount of teaching to formal educators about using the schoolyard. What are the behavior management strategies, materials management strategies that, non-outdoorsy educators can use to support teaching outside. Olivia, did you want me to share anything else?
I think if anyone has a question for questions for Erica, we could open it up for questions now. But yeah, I just wanted mostly to introduce you, Erica, so people kind of know the point, people who are engaged in this conversation at different levels.
And I just want to point out in the resources document, down at the bottom, additional resources, the elevating connections to the outdoors during COVID-19 is a really nice white paper about, how to be more inclusive. I don't know if in our language, in our way of framing what we're hoping to do, I don't know if anybody's seen that from Rethink Outside. And above that is I think it's a 2-page information document that was created to help us spread our message about what we're hoping to do. So I feel like Maine can glean information from what's going on at the national level. And finally, I'll add, from that 1,000-person conversation a week or two ago, there was a Padlet that was created, and I reached out to Sharon Danks to try to get the transcript of that. But what are the things that people are most worried about? How can we keep our kids, our environmental educators, our teachers safe if we do this kind of a model? So there's a lot of thinking that's already started at the national level. So I will be quiet now.
Thanks, Erica. Does anybody have a question for Erica? Okay, great. Oh,
actually,
yeah.
I have a question. It's the Zoom lag, slow response. I just want to say, first of all, thank you, Olivia, for organizing this, and Matt. We had a number over the years of teaching outside workshops in Greater Portland, and many times had Erica attend, and the resources that she shared were really straightforward. I've mentioned just a few things from her tips and tricks that she helped organize with the Boston Schoolyard Initiative, and people love them. I just think, Erica, you've really got something to offer. And I wonder if putting together a simple, I don't want to create more work for you, but you know, if we could find a way for you to put together a presentation like you did at our workshops, I think teachers are looking for specifics to test out.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that is a perspective I bring. My foot is in the formal education world and my heart is in the, you know, environmental ed world. So I've even had really outdoorsy educators say that these tips, once they had them, they felt so much more comfortable going outside with kids. And so it's such a grand opportunity to help kids get connected to the outdoors.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We will keep that in the ideas. I think right now it will be good for us to gather all the good ideas, and then we can kind of make an action plan of like, what are some of the strategies that we think will support this. So thanks, Erica, and thanks, Laura. Also wanted to just say, I've been having lots of conversations with Laura. Laura is an amazing educator and has done a ton of work on school green schoolyards and like helping schools transform their own schoolyards. And so I've been having a lot of thought conversations with Laura in the last few weeks, and she's one of the reasons that this meeting's happening. So thanks, Laura. Shout out to you. Let's go now to hear a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm popping back to my agenda. If you don't mind, Willard, I think it would be really great to hear a little bit from you. Willard has had the opportunity to be part of the Department of Education conversation in building the reopening framework. And Willard is the president of Chewonki Foundation. And so I think Willard can give us a little more sense from the inside thinking from the department. And there's also folks, I believe, from the Department of Education on this call right now. So it might be good for us to hear from the other side of that perspective of, you know, how can our field actually be supportive? What are some of the big limitations, and just kind of get our like realistic framing. And you know, we have to navigate this carefully because we want to be supportive. We don't want to add more complication in whatever that we do. So Willard, if you don't mind kind of sharing some of your thoughts or perspectives, that would be amazing.
Great. Olivia, can you hear me? I don't have video at the moment.
Yes.
Great. Good morning, folks. It's great to be here. And I just want to say at the start, I think if this crisis can lead to a long-term shift in how students are able to access the outdoors as a part of their education, that would be fabulous. And I just want to share a couple things that I had the opportunity to observe. And just for framing, just to say, Chewonki operates in 3 sectors that are on this call. One is the formal education. We're an independent school and approved private school. We're a accredited camp, and we're also a residential environmental learning center doing informal EE. So we kind of toggle between the different areas. And I joined an advisory committee on the reopening framework, formally from a learning center perspective, but also representing the independent schools. And I just want to say a couple things. First of all, I was very impressed by the leadership of Department of Ed, and really willing to embrace new ideas and creative thinking, and I think encouraging schools and the districts to innovate where possible. What I noticed is the collision of that openness with the reality of this time, which is there are it's almost a basic needs framework where I'm seeing, and I saw the discussion really being about the basics around health and equity, and I would call them the sort of basic needs of how, for instance, how do you get the education to the students? And so where a lot of the time is being spent is making sure that we can meet CDC guidelines throughout the operation, that we can and that we can deliver learning that is both in person and remote in an equitable fashion throughout all the different programs that schools need to offer, and so that all students are getting an equitable experience. And what I'm noticing in my own work and also from those calls is that that's a really heavy lift even as a start. So I have a lot of empathy for all the educators around the state and the educational leaders who are really trying to meet some basic needs. And I didn't even mention food, but how do you meet your basic expectations and hopes to distribute food throughout your district? And just to give a couple concrete specific examples, I was just talking to a superintendent that Chwanky works with, and he was noting that because he believes the guideline will be 1 student per seat in school buses, that they won't even have the transportation capacity to move all their students each day. So that single limiting factor from a health and safety perspective will affect the whole system about how kids are educated. So they're likely just to be doing some in person and some remote every day until things change. So multiple sites may or may not make the difference in that case, because there's just some structural limitations. So I don't, in sharing a couple of these things, and there's other things I could share, I'm certainly not meaning to be negative, but I think my hope is that we start where the schools are. And what I just heard from Erica on this idea of like really tangible, accessible supports that are also backed up by almost like tech support in this case, Erica and her team being able to maybe really help teachers. But what I was seeing is a lot of concern about time and preparation. I'll just give one last perspective. So all of our teachers in the state next year have to be at every moment prepared to teach both in person and remotely to every student that they have. So it's effective, in some cases that's effectively 2 preps for each student and for each class throughout the entire year, because you never know when you're going to be in person or you're going to be remote, or you might be going back and forth. And they're similar but slightly different, in some cases very different approaches to teaching and learning. So the workload on teachers is so intense, and also on the administrators to support it all, that it's hard to introduce other things on top of that. So again, definitely not trying to be negative, but just wanting, I think, to center our discussion on the teachers and the people in the schools and the students, and making sure that we're really thinking about how we can show up there. And Olivia, later in the agenda, if it makes sense, some of us who work with schools really closely in the environmental learning center context could also talk about some of our learning doing that in recent years. So happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Willard. Any questions for Willard? Go ahead. Yeah. Janine? Jean? Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, I think a question I have is that in talking to I guess a couple teachers recently, their perspective was they could be much more effective if they had the ability to just like really check in with each student just for an hour or 2 a week, rather than trying to do the remote classes and whatnot. So my question is there some additional thought to some real restructuring for how the non-in-person part goes? It's maybe going to be more effective, and I think that could also open up maybe more time for doing things outdoors, both at school but also at home.
Yeah, one thing I would say is that, which I forgot to mention before, is that there's a real emphasis on local control from DOE. So every district is empowered to make their own choices, and so it depends a little bit on the capacity and bandwidth and the thinking at the district level. And I'll put it in the chat, the link for the reopening framework. It's not absolutely prescriptive. It's definitely a list of considerations. And part 4 is about remote learning. And if you look at that, you can get a sense of how it's being approached. And this is a working document that the DOE is going to issue over time and revise. So I think, one thing that could come up from all the, there's incredible professional talent in this group here. If there are sort of concrete ways that can support the teaching and learning, whether in person or remote, and those can get some traction, they could really help districts across the state. But again, we just want to make sure we're really thinking about the basic needs, and put ourselves in their shoes, I think.
Willard, on that note, do you know if districts need to present a plan to the state DOE about how they will keep everyone safe? And if there's a deadline on that?
No, so they don't, they need to, I just put the link in the chat. There's not a check off approval process, but there is this framework. So you basically have to demonstrate, or you have to be able to demonstrate that you are considering the framework. Then you can make choices within that. But for instance, you have to have a remote learning plan that meets the needs of all students in developmentally appropriate ways. But it's not actually reviewed and commented on and signed off on. But it does have to, I think it has to go, you'll have to double check, but I think it has to go before the school board. So, the local school board. So it's more of a local decision-making framework guided by principals and CDC guidelines. So if you look through, there's a academic portion, more of a SEL portion, and remote learning, and then a facilities piece and operations. So.
Any other?
If there is any, I was just gonna say, if there is anyone from DOE here who has a different, has other perspective, of course, that would be helpful.
Beth, I don't know, I didn't talk to you about speaking today at all, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have any additional, I don't know, if there's any additional thoughts that you want to, thank you, first of all, for joining us. I know you're super busy, but if there's any additional thoughts or framing, it'd be great.
No, I think Willard did an excellent job. I mean, it was very much a collaborative process, and so our partners were just as involved as the DOE really in those meetings, and so I think he did a great job. And really the emphasis is it's a draft, and we understand that we needed to put something out for schools to feel like they had something to point to, and at the same time know that we have we can't predict what the situation is going to be like in mid-August, when we're really saying what is going to happen at schools. And it's an uncertain, scary place that we're starting to get used to being in as educators right now. It's sort of the new normal, but it's what it is. So we hope that it gives some of that without creating more anxiety, because it is truly a draft and we're getting feedback regularly. So as you look at it and spend some time with it, please reach out and share your thoughts, because you all bring such a wealth of experience in different places in the education world. And so we'd love to hear from that.
Thanks, Beth. I appreciate that. We're going to go now to Matt from the camp world and hear a little bit from that perspective, from the summer camp perspective.
Thanks, Olivia. And I'll invite, there's several extremely experienced and super smart camp people on here. So I'll just introduce it and then see if Reed and Jess or Jessica or Ron or again, Willard at Chewonki, if any of the camp people on here want to chime in, or I'll even throw it over to them. I think and I say we as Maine Summer Camps, started coming at this from the idea of, we have a bunch of resources that are scattered throughout the state of Maine. Most school districts, most towns have a summer camp or two located fairly close by. Some school districts have multiple camps located close by, which represent this fall probably a vastly underutilized resource. And if we're talking about getting kids into, de-densifying schools, getting kids into outdoor spaces that are already set up for a lot of the social emotional learning, a lot of the community building, and creating those school connections, which I reflect back on my own kids' experience over the last few months of remote learning and wonder what that would have looked like if he hadn't had 6 months of connections with his classmates and teacher to sort of buffer his remote learning. And so really sort of coming at it from that perspective of like, we're here in Maine, these are our communities, our local school districts are you know, usually not too far away from our camps. How do we use the resources that we might have available in terms of either facilities or transport or staff, and some really amazing staff and experienced educators? How can we resource those to help Maine kids? And so I've been having quite a few conversations with Reed and Jess, and so I'll throw it over to Reed and see if you want to pick up anything or expand on any of those points, and likewise Ron or Jessica, wherever I see Jessica down there. So yeah, any of you guys want to chime in on the camp's perspective, please feel free.
So sure, thanks, Matt. I sort of my start in this thinking was we were in a Maine summer camps gathering, talking with a large number of member camps in the organization, and sort of on the side, Matt and I started having this conversation about what resources do schools have, what resources do camps have, what needs do schools have, and how can we match those two up. I'm a logistics person. My title is the Director of Logistics and Risk Management for Kiev-Wavis Education. So I'm very much a how-to kind of person, and also looking at it from the sort of the safety perspective. And so as I read the DOE framework last week, I saw two things that were particularly interesting. One was Part 3, Section A, Item 3, that I highlighted at the top of the document, that is bullet point number 5 that Matt shared around there. Encourage visionary risk takers to create non-traditional models and plans. This is a time for innovation and big thinking. And I kind of went, well, that's us. And so Matt and I we were both reading the document at the same time and shared it almost simultaneously to each other, and thought that's what we're trying to do. The other thing that sort of struck me as I read through it was the sort of overarching theme of equity, and trying to think about how schools can maintain equity as they do either in person for everyone, in person for some students, or remote for all students. And so trying to balance that, and thought, well, there's got to be a way that camps can help in that process. Sending students obviously entirely remote brings up all sorts of challenges in equity in terms of access. I know the state's been working really hard to get internet access across the board, but I know that it's still a struggle for a lot of folks. Food, supervision, safety at home, all of those sorts of things are big challenges that the schools are facing. And so I sort of looked at it, and Matt used the phrase with me, it is remote in-person learning. It's blending the two. So we're not having students remotely out in their homes, but we're not having them in person in the schools. We're kind of finding the middle ground between those two and having them remotely in person at a camp. And so that could be something as simple as, hey, we've got cabins that currently might have bunks in them, but we could take those bunks out and they could become classrooms. We have outdoor spaces that are sort of naturally classrooms. There are benches in circles, there are picnic tables, there are all sorts of spaces that could become remote classrooms. Many camps have some staff, whether it be administrative staff, maintenance staff, whoever, there's at least some potential for supervision. It could be something as simple as just literally having remote learning happen at the camp where the students are very self-directed, or it could be very facilitated. Maybe it's utilizing ed techs, maybe it's utilizing student teachers from the UMaine system, whoever it may be. There have got to be ways that we can find things that match up. And so another hat that I wear, I'm a volunteer firefighter. And so I look at it from an emergency or crisis response situation and think, well, okay, if I've got this emergency, or I've got this crisis, this problem to solve, what are the steps that I'm going to take? Well, first, I need to find out what my needs are. Second, I need to find out what resources I have available to me. Third, I need to try to match those up. And so I started with this document framing it out by looking at what are the needs of schools. And Matt already used the term there, de-densifying, trying to get students spread out. And that was kind of where I started. And then it branched from there. So identifying the needs of schools, then looking at, well, what resources do camps have? And then having to try to find out how those two might be able to match up. So that's kind of where that document came from. And I'm not going to read anything from it, but feel free to peruse. Really, it was just trying to prime the pump, because as we know, it is local control and every school is different. Every camp situation is different. And so it is going to be very much up to local camps and local schools to work together to find solutions that work for them, but hopefully this can sort of prime the pump.
And I think one of the questions I've heard from a couple of folks that I've reached out to is maybe just understanding what some of the resources of the camps are a little bit more clearly for the schools. You know, there's a huge mix, but are there winterized cabins? Are there Wi-Fi? Is that accessible? Do those relationships exist between the camp director and the superintendent or the local school district already? And if not, maybe this is just a place to start that collaboration.
Thank you so much. Also, I think your name is Jess. Your t-shirt's really amazing. And very apropos for our conversation. So yeah, I think this assessment idea, almost like a community assessment of, you know, what are some community support structures that could be in place to support education in the fall is kind of a really cool idea with the camps, and maybe it would be expanded beyond that. I don't even know. And then we had another, I'm looking at Alex Brasili virtually here through my Zoom. We had another, I don't know if it was I think it was a teacher who sent an email back from one of our professional development advisory teams. Alex, who was that?
Yeah, it was Michelle from Bangor Schools, and I can't remember what her role is, but she had a really great idea about providing a resource for schools to just kind of do a self-assessment of their own facilities. So kind of like what Erica was saying, like, what resources do I currently have in my schoolyard? And I'm sure Laura has done this too with her school greening stuff, but making that widely available to schools to think about what they have currently as a starting place, so they're not kind of reinventing everything from scratch.
And I also see in the chat, local town rec departments have information on what is available locally. So maybe that's another partner that needs to be brought into this conversation as well. That's a super great idea. So we have some ideas kind of bubbling up. One of the things that I know I just really appreciate everyone for sharing your thoughts. One of the things that Matt and I were thinking might be an important step is this was like kind of like a small leaders thought meeting today, but we do feel like there needs to be a broader conversation about this with our bigger community, and you know, how to navigate that and how to make that productive is a question. But I do think it would be really, it would behoove us in the next week or two to pull together, you know, an hour, or maybe it's a 90-minute call where we present some of these, you know, concrete, like some of the same people maybe even would present resources, and then we create like a space where folks can give ideas and share ideas, like maybe in small group breakouts with a Google Doc, kind of like they did in the national outdoor learning call, but we could kind of bring it back home to Maine and maybe have a lot more voices join in. I think it might be really interesting to have, you know, folks from school leadership, like the curriculum directors and the superintendent and the principals association, you know, be invited at least. So I don't know how folks feel about that. It's almost like a town hall, like a virtual town hall, but maybe it would be less of a town hall and more of like community listening session where we could just have some presenters for the first part and then go to a small group breakout if people want to stay, and we could organize it so there could be some ideas shared. One of the, like, I put it in the agenda, but it was like ultimate goal ? Like maybe what this like leadership team of people, whoever's interested, maybe the types of things we can do are these structural things, like creating a toolkit, maybe pulling together some of these assessment pieces for communities, for schools, but ultimately like the decisions are going to have to be made, like the folks at WABUS were saying, like really at the local level. So what are some of the things that we can do to provide like supports to help these conversations, happen at the local level. So that's sort of the thinking behind like what I think we could do infrastructure wise, but I am totally open to suggestions. Laura, I see you have ideas.
One thing that I'm hearing from people is just that it's really, I think, I love the idea of a sharing meeting that you're suggesting. And then I think even letting people know that there might be a follow-up. I mean, knowing that everybody's needing a break, as if you're a classroom teacher right now, everyone needs some, at least the people I'm talking to, they just need a week, at least a week off to not think about this. But I think it's so different across the ages, and the case to be made is also different in that, I mean, I'm thinking once scenarios are together, you're going to be looking for funding. How can we have funding that might support the camps at the same time that the camps are supporting the schools? And I think with pre-K through 5, those are the kids whose parents can't go to their jobs because they can't supervise. And so I just think it would be great to, if it's not in the next meeting, it's sort of the next tier down is thinking, okay, how do we strategize all these camp opportunities? Do they take grades K through 3 and go to a local campsite, or any of these other, rec, and once there's so much information. But I just wanted to put that out there, that I feel like I've heard that again and again, that if you're going to be looking for state and national funding connected to the economy, as far as schools go, that's just something that needs to be right out there.
That's super helpful, Laura, and that makes sense.
And adding on to what Laura just said, I feel like I'd like to hear from Beth or Willard perhaps about what you're hearing from administrators in schools. I'm sure I know Portland's working on their plan right now for what school is going to look like. I don't know about the rest of the state. So I hear what Laura's saying about teachers. I think she's emphasizing teachers need that break, and yet I feel like we're under a time crunch because we want them to be thinking about this as they develop their plans. And perhaps I'm wrong that we're not as much under a time crunch, but I think we are.
Do you want me to respond to that, Olivia? Okay. I'll just say, I guess I would just say that I agree, and I think we are absolutely hearing, and we know educators, everyone's exhausted what was asked, and the way all of us sort of had to shift and pivot and do feats of phenomenal things. Everyone's exhausted, and people are still working very hard. And so while people are trying to get educators, whether they're teachers, administrators, all areas of education are very much aware of the time crunch. I would say, amazingly, we put out a call. We're creating an online resource of modules for remote learning for next year to launch in the fall. We had over 400 educators volunteer to be part of that this summer. They're tired, they're exhausted when they come to it, but they understand that we need this, and we need guidance on this and how to move forward. So I think I would not say, like, it's and they are exhausted, and we are under this time crunch, and everybody's working on it. I think, like I said before, the challenge is, yes, many school districts, if not all of them, are in some form of creating their plan, but having to, I think Willard talked about having to be ready to do plan A, B, or C at any time is very difficult because when it comes to resources and budgets, it's hard to commit that to something when it might not happen. And with the incredible social pressures of, the communities, which have a great say in their education for good reason, and, this is very much a local control piece. There are many families that say, take my kids back to school. I don't care what and other families who say, I'm not sending my kids back to school. I don't care what you say. So, and everywhere in between. And so school districts have this incredible burden of trying to plan and design, knowing that there will be students who won't come back regardless of what the plan says and what they choose to go forward with. And how do they then provide for and plan? And so I'm not 100% sure exactly what you wanted me to say, except that, I mean, I think that's my read on where people are at and what they're working towards and moving forward with. So.
Thank you. Anybody else have comments or questions right now? Yes, Bonnie.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Robbins. I'm school counselor at Whittier Middle School in Poland. I'm also president of the Maine School Counselor Association. And I've been working with the DOE with Bearshave since March when all this happened, with the school counselors and mental health clinicians. And one of the biggest fears that one of the things that comes out, now I completely buy into this model, and the few people on this call know me and know our district is very much into this camp model, and we work with some of the camps here. We do a lot of, try to get outside a lot. One of the things that have come up with the school counselors each week and the mental health counselors is the worry about staff coming back. Kids are resilient. You know, we're all gonna be there to support kids, but we're worried about the staff coming back. And there's a social emotional committee that's working on a curriculum that I'm part of with the DOE. There's all these different groups working on things for the fall. And then each individual district, because of the local control piece, is working on things for the fall. So I'm trying to like slow at least like our district down because everyone's kind of doubling up. And my worries is all these different groups working together to throw things at staff in the fall, and I'm worried about the fragility of the staff. You know, again, kids are resilient and this model is excellent. And I think I'd love to see this go through, but I do agree with bringing in some of those other people like the superintendents and it's amazing to me how each local district is doing something different and everybody's racing really quickly to hurry up and let's plan for the fall. Let's get this done. And there's all these groups coming together. So I kind of keep trying to like talk to districts about slow down a little bit. You know, we talk in our district of train for a marathon, not a sprint. Everything's hurry up, let's get it done. Let's slow it down a little bit and let's really be mindful. I think this model will be awesome. How do we slowly, mindfully bring it in without saying, okay, August, here you go. You know, this would be great if it was long lasting. Just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Bonnie. I think it was Amy, and then we'll go to Ron.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment, and actually Bonnie just really set me up for this. So the reason that I'm on this call is because I think this is a fascinating policy conversation, and also back when ELMS was a little bit earlier in their development, I helped them a little bit with some program evaluation work. So I do know that there's this sort of continuum of goals or intent behind what you're formulating. And I think there's a pretty large continuum from joining with your local Parks and Rec department to do outdoor learning from a multi-day residential overnight experience. And I think it's a continuum that I was also working on the content learning strands and how you meet educational goals and curriculum, but it's also how do we rebuild relationships? How do we worry about social emotional needs? And what are the added value of outdoor learning spaces or residential learning environments like the summer camps or places like Chewonki to be helping on that dimension. So I think that I'm envisioning, I think you talked about doing an inventory of camps and their resources, and I think that is absolutely going to be helpful to the field to figure out what they're looking for, but also maybe developing a little more framing around this is what maybe some different models of what schools might want to uptake. So here's support we need for this element. Here's support we need for this element. It is a local control state. I think you're going to have to be sort of selling this opportunity and conceptualizing it in such a way that schools can understand what's available and why it might be a benefit to them with more clarity on if your goal is X, you might want to consider these opportunities. Just my 2 cents.
Thanks, that's super helpful, Amy. Ron?
Yes, well, mine is more of a question. Right now in these discussions that are going on with school professionals, are they looking at this point only on what their internal resources are, being partial in-school learning opportunities and online opportunities? or are there some discussions already about how to utilize resources beyond the school?
I think Laura, yeah, Laura, do you want to share what's happening in the Portland?
I am not on the inside with this discussion. I'm just in touch with a few people who are in the planning group, and they're just coming out with recommendations to teachers today, which I have not seen. All I know is that outdoor learning is one of the things that I think they're sending a framework out to school-based planning groups. And I just think they're open to it. I think everyone's so overwhelmed that they're not sure what any of this means. So that's all I know for Portland, but I know there's an openness to it.
Does anyone else have insight on that question? I think that's another reason, Ron, why we need to have these conversations, to try to get an understanding of that. I don't think we know yet.
Olivia, Willard here. Can I chime in?
Yes.
I would agree with what Laura said. There's definitely an openness. In my limited experience, it's down the list though. I think it's going back to something I said before. There's a lot of needs that at a statutory or regulatory level that need to be addressed first. And there's so many changes that have to be done in those areas, and budgets are going to be tight in some cases significantly, and costs are going to be up in certain areas compared to last year. So just speaking from the Chewonki perspective, most of the schools, the main schools that we work with, are essentially contracting their range of activities. And a lot of the partners, not that they don't appreciate them, they really do, but we got calls where saying we're not doing anything at least through winter 2020, 2021, and anything off site, right? Or anyone coming in who's not on the staff, because that's a way to introduce risk. So that's not every place, but that's the experience that we're having. So, again, figuring out the very best way to support and listening to the teachers and the superintendents is going to be really important.
Thanks. Drew, I'm trying to keep track of the hand raising going on. Drew, I think your hand is raised.
Yeah, thanks, Olivia. Just to loop back to what Amy was saying, I think it's important to make clear distinctions of facility use and curriculum partnership. And I think both sound very important, but offering up space for, intensifying. What's your term, Matt? The intensifying, or it was a great term.
De-densification.
Thank you.
I think that might be Amy's term. I'm not sure.
That's something. And then there's the actual curriculum. I think Amy was getting to that. And I think we have to be really clear, both for public relations, quality control, and our relationship with schools, that those are very clearly, because I think there could be the case where general public perceive that when you're saying we're offering this up, that always comes with the curriculum support end. And I know for the folks on this call, that's not an issue, but it could be an issue in other cases. So that's just a caution that I wanted to put out.
Amy, is your hand still raised, or was that from earlier? Okay.
Sorry,
I'm just getting the Zoom thing. All right, well, this has been, I'm sure we could literally talk about this all day long. It is an incredibly complex conversation to navigate, but I appreciate people coming with the spaciousness and openness to at least, I know that right now my brain is already really overtaxed, and then to open yourself to these like really complex conversations is hard. But I do think that we should continue to explore this, because, we're in a time when this takes big thinking, like you were saying, Reed. I think it's really true. So I think for next steps, I'm trying to figure out next steps. I might have to be in contact with this group over email to really flesh out next steps. I need to think about it a little bit. I do think that it would behoove us to have a broader conversation call. And then from that call, we may also have a little bit more clarity on like the working pieces that are needed. It might almost kind of replicate this conversation a little bit, but just open it up to more folks. Maybe with some different speakers and perspectives. So if folks have great ideas about that, I would love to, you know, have an offline conversation with you about that. And, you know, we can think about how we want to co-host it. Like, it doesn't need to be like MEEA, and maybe it's, you know, the Nature-Based Ed Consortium, MEEA, the camps, the ELM, like whoever, like if we want to co-host this town hall conversation, I don't know how that's going to look. But I think that's probably our next step. And then maybe coming out of that, we'll have some really concrete like pieces of work, assessment pieces, maybe some case studies, like framing out what this could potentially look like and being really concrete about that, like you were saying, Amy. So it might end up being like a toolkit of support and maybe some op-ed pieces or things just to continue the conversation and the framing. I'm just kind of brainstorming here. So are folks feeling like this is the right path to continue and pursue this conversation?
It feels like the benefit of the collaboration, although I'm still conscious of the timing and fearful that schools will feel a need to lock a plan in. But as was noted in the chat, we could be seeding ideas that are useful in the future if not implemented right away.
I feel like we could move on this really quickly. I know it's a big lift, but I feel like we need to move on it really quickly and not draw it out. Laura?
I think it's something that I try to keep at the forefront is this is an incredible opportunity for people in this sector to, it's an opening for a change. And I also keep in mind that the DOE is making their final recommendations in August. So I think schools are just starting this discussion, but the more specifics, that's why I mentioned Erica's training, that can help people wrap their minds around what it looks like. And I would just say, I think Drew was maybe alluding to this partly, is, you know, in our teaching outside workshops, we said to people, you don't have to do a whole new curriculum. Just take what you teach and teach it outside. And that was a starting point. And then they responded to the outdoors. And I think there would be more interest, you know, growing interest in the curricula that people have to offer through EE programs. But for them to understand that they can take what they already teach and go outside with it is, I think, a stepping stone to all these other things. But I just think it's an incredible opportunity.
I agree. I think it is an incredible opportunity, but I also think we don't have a lot of time. If we're going to even think about having something that will happen in the fall, we need to move and become organized to make it happen.
And adding on to that, Ron, I worry about Olivia. I've known her for many years, and you know, this is amazing that she and Matt pulled this together. Thank you so much for doing that. And yet, who's the right person to host this? Like, yes, perhaps it's MEEA, but I also know how much Olivia has on her plate. And how do we not let this amazing group of people, how can we keep us together and not overtax one person or one organization?
I appreciate that, Erica. So maybe the path forward will be, if folks are willing to support moving this conversation forward, and you could send me an email saying you're willing to help move the next piece forward, which would be a larger, like, you know, community listening session. And you can send me an email today. That would be super helpful so that we can get together and plan this thing fast. I mean, Matt and I were saying, let's talk this week and like, let's pull this thing together for like, you know, next week, I don't know if that's possible, but like maybe the week after, like let's get this thing done so that we can at least open up the conversation broader, bring more voices in, get the feedback, and then start doing some of the pieces that might help districts see like some support clarity. Like Amy, I love your idea of some case studies. Like what could this really look like? What are some different options? And Drew, like being really clear about like, you may be using a camp for space and not for like curriculum. Like there's different models, and being really transparent about like what those are, so there's clarity there. You know, and we can't fix COVID, like, but we can try to build some like support ideas and structure, and then folks can maybe open conversation in their local districts with some tools. As well as I do think there's some really concrete work that could happen, Erica, around teacher training and professional development. That would probably be more if like teachers are wanting to and interested, but I know our sector is really well poised to do some really good professional development for teachers. Lots of folks on this call are, so I think that's a good thing. And Whit, I know I haven't had the Land Trust World talk yet. Sorry about that. But I do think there's also this Land Trust network, and I've been talking to a lot of Land Trust educators who have, like, they're really interested. They're like, we already work with our schools really closely, and we like are thinking we can be supports, you know, we can do like little small group things or help with the teachers understanding. So there's also that other community level. There's camps and there's also Land Trust, and not all of them do education, but a lot of them do. So there's a lot of layers of support structures that that we need to like almost like systems map out in a way with this community assessment maybe. So it's not really totally formed in my brain yet, of course, but I think there's some concrete work that we could do rapidly to move it forward. There's been a really good chat conversation on the side that I've been having a hard time keeping up with, but I can also download those. And maybe, Alex, thank you so much for helping take notes. Maybe we could incorporate some of the chat ideas into the notes as well, so that we don't lose those good ideas. If anybody else has good ideas, you can email me and Matt. Matt, are you willing to continue to like work with me as a point person too?
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely.
Is there anybody else who like, yes, I want to be like in this like leadership thinking mode around pulling together the summit? Is there anyone else right now who would commit to that? You can also email me later, but awesome. So I see Laura's willing. I'm going to kind of go through.
Ron, Reed.
Reed and Jess, Kristen. Anybody else willing to help pull this town hall together, or whatever we're going to call it? If you have a good idea for a name, I don't want town hall to seem like too official. Okay, awesome. Well,
Olivia, really quickly, oh, did she just drop off? I thought Beth had her hand up, but I think she just dropped off the call, so never mind.
Sorry about that. I can circle back with her and thank her for joining and ask for any additional thoughts from DOE as well.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll stay in touch via email, and thanks again, everyone, for joining this morning and for all the great work you're doing. It's really great and it's really important, so I really appreciate it. And have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Olivia.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank you.